The street outside was quieter than the market 2 blocks away, but footsteps still passed steadily, office workers cutting across to save time, mothers hurrying children home from school, tourists pausing long enough to snap a photo before moving on. The church stood at the edge of the town square, its bell tower weathered but proud, its heavy doors closed except on Sundays. Few of them slowed at the base of the church steps, where a man sat hunched against the stone wall. His coat was ragged, patched with scraps of cloth that didn't match. His beard had grown wild, his hair tangled. Beside him sat a battered paper cup with a few coins rattling inside, though he didn't call out for more. His eyes stayed fixed on the ground, following cracks in the pavement as if they were maps to a life he had lost. Some people turned their heads away, embarrassed to meet his gaze. Others glanced at him with pity, quick and fleeting. Most did not look at all. He was used to it, days blurred together, each one a slow unraveling. The cold of the stone seeped into his bones. The hunger dulled into background noise. Loneliness pressed harder than either. The church bells told the hours, but they meant nothing. Time had already let him go. Until one afternoon when the rhythm of footsteps broke, a tall figure paused at the foot of the steps. He wore a simple coat, nothing to distinguish him at first glance. But there was something about the way he stood, straight-backed, motionless, as if even the wind hesitated around him. People who passed noticed him, even if they didn't know why. There was a gravity about him, a presence that made silence deepen. The homeless man lifted his eyes, half expecting the stranger to drop a coin and move on. Instead, the man climbed the steps and lowered himself to sit beside him, matching his posture against the wall. For a long moment, neither spoke. The city sounds softened around them, the clatter of a bicycle chain, the shuffle of shoes, the murmur of voices all distant. Finally, the homeless man rasped, "You don't have to sit here." "I know," the stranger replied. His voice was calm, steady, carrying weight without force. The man studied him. "Most people, they don't even stop." "I'm not most people," the stranger said simply. Something about the words stirred a flicker of curiosity, enough to push the man into another question. "Why?" The stranger's eyes moved to the church doors, then back to the cracked pavement. "Because silence is easier when it's shared." The homeless man frowned, uncertain if it was kindness or riddling. He wanted to dismiss it, but the warmth of having someone beside him, even wordless, pressed too close to ignore. "I know you're still here." The man barked a laugh, harsh and empty. "Still here. That's all I am. Here, forgotten." The stranger turned his head, meeting his eyes for the first time. There was no pity in the gaze, no judgment. Only recognition, as though he were looking at someone he had once known. Forgotten is not the same as unseen. The words landed harder than the man expected. His throat tightened. He looked away quickly, ashamed of the sudden sting in his eyes. No one had spoken to him like that in years, not as a problem to fix, not as a ghost to avoid, but as a man. Minutes passed. The stranger didn't fill them with chatter. He sat in silence, letting the stillness expand, making space where the man's shame usually lived. At last, the man whispered, "I used to come to this church every Sunday with my wife." He swallowed, his voice fraying. Before she got sick. After she was gone, I couldn't walk through those doors anymore. Couldn't pretend I believed in anything." The stranger nodded, as though he'd known all along. "And yet you sit here." The man let out a long breath, shaky. "Because it's the last place I remember being whole." The stranger closed his eyes briefly, then said, "That's reason enough." For the first time in years, the man felt something shift inside him. He didn't know who this stranger was, or why he had chosen to sit beside him, but his presence felt like more than company. It felt like a guard against the emptiness that had ruled too long. The passerby watched quietly now. Some recognized the man in the plain coat, realizing with a start who he must be, one of the tomb guards, the sentinels of silence at the National Memorial. To see him here, on church steps beside a man everyone else ignored, unsettled them. Some whispered, some filmed. Others lowered their heads, sensing that something sacred was unfolding in front of stone walls older than memory. The homeless man rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand. "Why me?" he asked again, more softly this time. The tomb guard finally answered, his voice almost a whisper. Because someone once sat with me when I was breaking. And it saved me. The man stared, his lips parting. But no words came. Tears gathered instead, spilling down his cheeks unchecked. And though the town did not yet know it, that conversation born in silence on the steps of a church would ripple outward until it reached every corner, changing not only one man, but everyone who called that town home. For the first time in years, he cried without hiding it, and for the first time in years, he wasn't crying alone. The man wiped his face roughly with his sleeve, embarrassed by the tears that had escaped. But the tomb guard didn't flinch. He sat steady, his silence as solid as the stone wall behind them. For someone used to being invisible, it was disarming to be seen without judgment. "You said someone sat with you," the man whispered, voice husky. "What did they say?" The guard's eyes softened. "Not much. They didn't need to. They just didn't leave." The man thought about that, chewing the inside of his cheek. Most people, they run when things get heavy. "Nobody stays. I stayed today," the guard replied quietly. The simplicity of it broke something open. The man pressed his hands to his face, shaking. Between sobs, words tumbled. The factory that shut down, the bills he couldn't pay, the slow unraveling after his wife's illness, the drinking, the shame, the friends who stopped calling, the family who looked the other way. He wasn't weeping now. He was releasing, pouring out years of silence that had fossilized inside him. The guard listened. Not a single interruption, not a single attempt to fix what couldn't be fixed with quick words. His stillness gave permission for the man to empty himself. Passers-by slowed, drawn to the rawness of it. Some frowned, unsettled. Others folded their arms, pretending not to care while their eyes lingered. A few, touched without knowing why, stopped entirely, forming a loose circle around the two men. When the man finally ran out of breath, the silence thickened. He slumped back against the wall, eyes swollen, chest heaving. "I'm nobody now," he muttered. "Just a ghost waiting to disappear." The guard shook his head slowly. "You're somebody. You're a husband who loved his wife. You're a worker who built things with his hands. You're a man who is still here, even when it would have been easier not to be." The man's lips trembled. No one had said such words to him in years. "Your name?" the guard asked softly. The man hesitated, then croaked, "Thomas." The guard nodded once. "Then I will not forget it." "And neither will they." He gestured subtly toward the small crowd that had gathered. Thomas looked up, startled. He hadn't realized how many people were watching. Faces stared back, some curious, some moved, some ashamed of how many times they had passed him without seeing. And now, one by one, they reacted. A young woman stepped forward first, kneeling awkwardly. "Thomas," she said, her voice shaking. "I live down the street. I can bring food, if you'd like." Thomas blinked, stunned. Then a shopkeeper spoke. "He came into my store once, years ago, helped me fix a hinge for nothing. I never thanked him properly. Thomas, I'll see that you're warm tonight." Others followed. A teenager dug into his backpack and pulled out a sandwich. An elderly woman pressed a scarf into his lap. Someone slipped money into his cup, not the casual kind, but deliberate, steady. The crowd seemed to ripple outward, people realizing in real time that Thomas was no longer invisible. And the guard? He said nothing more. He simply sat, letting the town find its voice, letting them see what he had already seen, a man, not a ghost. By the next day, the story was everywhere. Someone had filmed the moment the ragged man weeping, the sentinel listening, the crowd gathering. The video carried itself across the internet, captioned with words like compassion and dignity. People far from the little town wept as they watched a soldier of silence offer presents instead of speeches. Journalists arrived, trying to interview the tomb guard. He refused, returning quietly to his post. When pressed, he said only, "It was his story, not mine." Thomas, however, found his voice. At first shy, he told reporters what the guard had said, how a single act of sitting changed everything. "I thought I was finished," he confessed. "But he reminded me I had a name." And now so do all of you. The town changed. The church opened its hall on weekdays, offering meals and shelter. Volunteers formed a small group called the Watch, inspired by the Guard, committed to sitting with anyone who felt invisible. Shopkeepers donated clothes. Children drew pictures of Thomas with bright colors, taping them to his wall. Slowly, he began to smile again. Months later, Thomas stood in the church, not on the steps this time, but inside, clean-shaven, his back straighter. The congregation had invited him to speak. His words were halting, but every person listened. I thought being seen meant being judged, he said, but being seen saved me. If you see someone today, really see them, maybe you'll save them too. The crowd rose in quiet applause. Some wept openly, and though the Guard never returned to that church, his presence remained. The townspeople said they could feel him still, in the warmth of shared meals, in the patience of listening, in the courage to sit down beside someone who thought themselves forgotten. Years later, when children asked about the change, why their town was kinder, why no one was allowed to slip through the cracks anymore, parents told the story. A sentinel of the tomb once sat outside our church. He sat beside a man no one saw, and because of that, we all learned to see. The takeaway became legend, passed quietly from one heart to another. True guarding is not only of monuments or borders, but of people, especially those the world walks past. And sometimes, the greatest act of remembrance is not for the dead, but for the living who believe they are already gone.